Welcome to the Moulding Health Show. Our goal is to leverage the wisdom and experience of healthcare practitioners to set you on a path of self-discovery and healing. These insights, coupled with a multidisciplinary approach to each area of interest, should provide an invaluable resource to everyone looking for a better approach to health. In this episode, we speak to Emma Wijnberg about hippotherapy and sensory integration disorder from an occupational therapist perspective. Emma Wijnberg, welcome to the show. We're really glad to have you on board. So we've been looking forward to this for quite some time, but because I think the area of interest that you have is so cool. So we're going to be talking about hippotherapy. Welcome. I'm really glad that you decided to join.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
So when we talk about hippotherapy, can we just go straight into that? Because I think, the first time, obviously we've been working with healthcare practitioners for close on 8 years now. But I remember there was a therapist in Cape Town, and she was doing hippotherapy. And, as soon as she signed on, I had to go like, what is hippotherapy? So it's not something that I would have immediately said, okay, that's healthcare related. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Sure. So the name is quite deceptive. I have a lot of patients asking me if I do hypnotherapy. A lot of patients ask me, what has it got to do with hippos? So the word hippo comes from the Greek word for horse, which is hippo. So basically just horse therapy. And hippotherapy is a treatment modality that is used by occupational therapists, speech therapists, and physiotherapists. And it's a postgraduate training that we go through. And we basically are using the horse as our therapy ball. So we use the movement of the horse to stimulate sensory pathways in the brain. We use the movement of the horse to increase muscle tone or decrease muscle tone in children with cerebral palsy. Something about the movement of the horse stimulates the part of the brain that is responsible for speech. So we see real improvements in children with speech difficulties.
That's actually really interesting. Emma, can you tell me then, what is the difference between hippotherapy and equine-assisted therapy?
Sure. So equine-assisted therapy is specifically a psychologist or a social worker's treatment modality. And with equine-assisted therapy, you don't get on the horse. You use the interactions and the emotional aspects of being around the horses therapeutically. So obviously with hippotherapy, we are using that inherently as well. We have got the emotional benefits, but obviously we're not psychologists or social workers. So our area of expertise is more within the rehabilitation realm. We do have a lot of kids that we see that have comorbidities like anxiety, and we work with those as well. I think, like I said, the horse inherently does have emotional benefits for everybody. So that's the difference.
So I'm very curious, but tell me, so why horses though? So our little boy goes to a therapy center where someone uses dogs as well. So I don't know. I mean, we haven't interviewed anyone that does that as well. But is there a specific reason that you work with horses?
Well, you can't ride on dogs, so that's the
Good
first
point.
reason. So I think animal therapy has always interested me. I love animals, and I've seen the benefit in myself having animals around, and also just in the kids that I see, as well as my own children. And I've ridden horses my whole life. So I think hippotherapy really interested me from that point of view, because I've seen the benefits that horse riding can have on so many different people, young and old, children with difficulties as well, and helping with confidence and self-esteem. So the hippotherapy route was the natural way for me to go. In fact, I actually applied to study occupational therapy already knowing about hippotherapy and wanting to go into that as a postgraduate thing. So the reason that we use horses well, first of all, because they're the only animal we can ride. So they're the only animal we can have the child sitting on, basically mimicking a therapy ball or a swing. But for every stride that the horse takes, the child has to shift their balance 8 times. So you're not going to get that on any piece of equipment in a therapy room. So basically, the child has to make postural adjustments. They have to shift their center of gravity. They have to activate the vestibular system. So yeah, there's just so many benefits that just purely the movement of the horse creates, and we position the child in lots of different ways on the horse. So you don't just have your forward plane of movement. You can place them in side sitting or backwards. You can eliminate vision so that they've got to rely purely on their proprioceptive and their vestibular systems. So really just the movement of the horse on its own is inherently therapeutic, particularly with sensory difficulties.
I really liked what you said there. I mean, so obviously I learned something about that, other than you shouldn't be riding other animals. But the one thing is, I mean, so it was quite interesting when you said you always knew you wanted to get there, because that's phenomenal, firstly. But tell me, do you have to convince people though? Because for me, I've ridden horses, but it's not like, as you said, it was always part of your landscape from the time you were a child. So when someone comes to you, do they already have a liking for horses? Or how do you convince them, actually, I want to get onto this really, I want to get onto the horse to be able to do therapy? Is there like a process around that? Do you find that that's an issue?
So we have a range of people that come to us. Some people come to us specifically for hippotherapy because we are the only practice in our area that offers it. So a lot of people get referred, the neuropeds and the psychs and all of the professionals that work in our area have seen firsthand the benefits and how much faster hippotherapy is in comparison to just pure OT. So we combine the two. Usually we'll do both with the child. So a lot of parents are referred to us purely for that reason. Others will come to us and we'll assess them and we'll suggest hippotherapy, and they give us very strange looks, and we have to explain that it doesn't involve hippos. And basically what I've just explained to you, we've got a beautiful little video that we made a couple of years ago, actually, with a demo of some hippotherapy sessions and some kiddies that we work with and the different things that we do, as well as interviews with parents that had been through the therapy process. And I find that using that video helps a lot of parents because they can see firsthand that other parents were also skeptical in the beginning and that they've seen the results. So yeah, sometimes parents do need a bit of convincing. Sometimes the children need a bit of convincing, particularly with your sensory sensitive children. So your children that struggle with gravitational insecurity or struggle with their feet being off the ground and unpredictable movement, or perhaps are just scared of horses specifically. Those children do take a bit of convincing, but I think we've only had one case where we've actually had to stop because we felt that it wasn't beneficial for the child because they weren't settling. So usually after about 3 sessions, we see that the child that had been nervous to begin with settles quite nicely.
Yeah, and again, this is more my amateur view on it, but I've heard as well that there's a connection between the horse that you don't get from many other animals. Is that true? I mean, there's almost like a connection, and because I worked with people that actually, they didn't have big enough places where they actually had their own horses, but they would, have it stabled and then go ride it over the weekend, as an example. But they all said the same thing, which was there's a connection, with the horse, and it's something. It's actually quite amazing. Do you find that with kids as well, that they form this connection with the horse, and that's what keeps them coming back for therapy?
Absolutely. So I think that people can form connections with any animal, but for me, me personally, the connection that I have with horses is so therapeutic. So if I have a kiddie that doesn't arrive for a session or cancels, I just go and sit on my pony and connect. Yeah, so I definitely have my own personal benefits emotionally from horses. And I've definitely seen that in a lot of the children that we see. So some of the kids, like our CP kids that have lots of other therapies, hippotherapy becomes their favorite therapy because they're going to see their pony, and the connection that they develop. Or, we've got a couple of kids that we've been seeing for years and years, our CP kids particularly, and they've got such a bond with our little pony Razzle. It's beautiful to see, and it brings tears to my eyes often, just seeing the connection that these kiddies have established with the pony. And I think it's because there's so much non-verbal communication that happens between the child and the horse. And the way that we do therapy is we enable the child to form a way of communicating their needs to the horse. So if they want to stop, they either need to verbalize, please stop, Razzle, or if they're non-verbal, they usually will put their hand on the horse's neck to say stop and pat the horse's neck to say go. And so we empower them, and I think that they feel that they have their specific connection with the horse, and the horse understands what they're asking. And I think that that's so empowering for these kids that struggle in the world, and where they have things that are out of their control and things that are so hard for them. And when they're on the horse, they've got that connection and that ability to go where they want to go. So our wheelchair-bound children are not restricted in movement when they're on the horse. They can tell the horse where they want to go and how fast they want to go. Yeah, so it's really, that connection is incredible.
It's actually interesting that you say that. I just want to continue with this train of thought, though. But is there something about the eyes as well? I mean, like someone told me, like the eyes, because they're like massive eyes, and it's almost like the horse. You can see the horse understanding, or having that affection. Is there anything around that? I mean, how do you find that the horse actually, or have you found the opposite, where the horse actually doesn't like the patient for whatever reason? I'm just curious.
We have had clashes. Yeah, we have. Just like we have clashes with therapists and children, and then we switch horses or whatever. And yeah, I mean, that does happen. It sounds a bit strange, but it definitely happens. And we see burnout in our ponies as well. So emotional burnout, which also sounds so silly. They're animals, but they take on so much of the emotional stuff that the kids bring with them. But about the eyes, it's so interesting that you say that, because yes, that's something I've always myself have been aware of. And the kids seem to gravitate towards the eyes as well. Even the tiny babies want to touch the eyes. Mm-hmm. But this past weekend, I was hiking in the Berg, and I came across this pony that was obviously like one of the Basutu ponies, and the saddle was there and all the bags were there, and this pony was just tied up to a tree in the sun. And I just went, and it was so skittish. It had obviously kind of not been treated that well and was nervous of humans and whatever. But when I got it to settle, I just could see through these eyes, I could see this horse's soul. And it was such an amazing experience for me personally, even though I work with horses every day, just connecting with that animal. And definitely the eyes, I said to my husband as well, I just said that horse's eyes, you could see that it's got such a gentle soul, and you do definitely connect so much with the horses through their eyes. Absolutely.
Okay, cool. I'm glad I asked that question then, because it was always someone told me that and I didn't quite get it, but I don't think I asked anyone else. But it's I'm glad you confirmed that for me. But I like what you said about the the control part, and I'm probably seeing, and Shaz and I probably have to try to get a psychologist or something in, that also works with horses, because that would be amazing, because there's something about what you said about the control part. I love Game of Thrones, and I've watched it, I think 1.5 times now. But in Game of Thrones, when Bran, I don't know if you watched it, but when Bran becomes a cripple, yeah, when Bran becomes a cripple, there's this little boy, and the first thing that they do is he actually gets a suggestion to get a saddle done specifically for him, so that he still has that control of movement. He can still be almost like in control and get around, because this was before the days of chairs and stuff like that, or wheelchairs. But yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that. I know, Shaz, did you have something else in mind?
Well, it was actually also just going to go along the line of control. I loved what Emma said, especially with kids that are non-verbal, that using a therapy tool like hippotherapy actually gives them a way to be able to communicate what they want in, what can be for little kiddies a really topsy-turvy world when they battle with communications. So you've mentioned that hippotherapy works with your CP kids, which is your cerebral palsy kids. Would hippotherapy help with your kids more on the autism spectrum?
Yeah, so I would say probably our biggest client base are our ASD kids. Yeah, absolutely, because of their sensory difficulties. So it works on that. And then the verbal difficulties and the communication and the social things. So absolutely, I think out of all the population of kids that we see, ASD kids benefit the most from hippotherapy.
Okay, that's actually interesting, because that's a nice segment into the more sensory integration related stuff. So is there a specific reason that you find that it's much more effective with these type of patients?
Yeah, so I think our ASD kids, we all know, have all got sensory difficulties. And as I said, just the movement, just purely the movement of the horse works on that sensory system so intensively. And then the communication side of things, even if they're nonverbal, they can communicate with the horse, and teaching them those social skills of two-way communication, give and take. Yeah, so really just working on those social skills. And then even with our verbal kids, that say, for example, our semi-verbal kids, it's very motivating for them to get them to talk. Being on the horse, it seems to be a motivating space for them, because in order to communicate with the horse, they perhaps need to speak. And so it can be very motivating. And I think our kids that are not motivated to engage in the world seem to engage a lot better when they're on the horse as well. It's just something different. And they're outside as well. Sorry.
No, sorry. That was me. But I'm glad you finished that thought. So are you advocating that almost every parent should get a horse for their child? Is it on that level?
No, because we're not teaching horse riding. So
Okay.
what we do is very specific. So horse riding is great. I think horse riding, like I said, inherently is so beneficial for every child to learn. But in terms of hippotherapy, we're very specific about what we do on the horse. And if you don't know what you're doing and you're trying to do therapy on the horse, you can do more damage to the sensory systems than good. So we do have some people in our area that claim to be doing hippotherapy, but they're not qualified OTs or physios or speech therapists. They're just horse riding instructors that think hippotherapy sounds like a cool thing to do. So they're not qualified in hippotherapy. And we've seen kids leave us and go to them because the therapy is obviously cheaper, because it's not what's the word?
Qualified, or they're not qualified?
Yes, they don't need to be qualified, so it's cheaper. And then the kids end up coming back to us worse than what they were when they started. So there's so many different things you have to consider. So in order to be a hippotherapist, you have to have the postgraduate qualification, but then you also have to have, up until level 3, your horsemanship qualification. So you can't just go in there not knowing horses. First of all, you need to know which horse to match with which child in terms of the size, the stride of the horse, the proprioceptive input that the horse gives, the vestibular input that the horse gives, because every horse gives different inputs. You need to know when to shorten the stride, when to lengthen the stride. You need to learn how to get the child to weight shift in a positive way. You need to know where to support the child and when to support the child, and when not to support the child to challenge them more. You need to know whether or not different postures are actually beneficial for the child. So, for example, some children don't benefit at all from sitting sideways on the horse, and it can do more harm than good. Other children really benefit from sitting sideways, but then you need to support them in specific places. And facing backwards, and we lie the child over the barrel of the horse as well, so they're hanging upside down, either on their backs or on their tummies. And all of those things, if you don't know what you're doing on a sensory level, can really, really do damage.
I think for me, it's what you're saying makes a lot of sense, and I'm going to give you a story to illustrate it. But I think you can definitely, even from a physical point of view, I mean, I think you can do lots of damage. So before we had kids, Ingrid, my wife, and I, we went to Drakensberg, and obviously we didn't grow up with horses. I don't think I've ever been on a horse. And we went to Drakensberg, and you look at all of the things. I think we stayed at Drakens, Champagne Sports. And you look at all of the things, and it was like horse riding. Okay, that seems pretty cool. And we went for the ride, but I got this horse, which was like, you could check it just wanted to go, and and Ingrid's horse was like the complete opposite of that. But I remember going down this, obviously we went to it. It was a guided trail though, so we went down, and then the horse, when it knew it was going to come back, it was like, okay, I'm going for it. But I had to really hold on to it, like, so that it doesn't do that. But so the reason I'm saying this is that we were sore for a week, like, so I think if you're doing it wrong, obviously it's going to be terrible. But Ingrid still has a story about that, but she was more sore. And I think because, the guy was guiding her along, and she wasn't sitting right in the saddle or something. But yeah, she was very sore. So I get that completely.
So if you think about the challenge of sitting on a horse for the first time with a saddle, we don't use saddles in therapy. The child is just on the horse's back. We have like what's called a numbness. So it's like a blanket that goes over the horse's back that we strap onto the horse, but it's not a saddle. So there's no external support. The child feels the horse's movement 100%. So that's even more challenging. So if you try and sit on a horse and ride it with no support, so no stirrups, no saddle, no nothing, you're going to struggle to stay on the horse the first time.
But you see, that for me is so amazing about what you were saying with these people that claim to be able to do hippotherapy. If you really start thinking about kids that are tactile defensive or have problems with their vestibular system or even have cerebral palsy where their muscles are contracted, the amount of damage that could be done because the child is placed incorrectly on the horse so it's very definitely, from what I'm understanding, something that has to be done in a therapeutic environment. You can't just assume that, okay, I'm going to put my child on a horse and off we go. I mean, as a kid, I did horse riding at boarding school, and, I know exactly how painful it is when you get thrown off that horse.
Yeah.
And, especially if a child battles to communicate and that kind of thing, you could also bring in an intense fear in a child because they've now been thrown from an animal that they're not sure of. So I do also understand, there's also that connection with their pony, which is why you don't chop and change ponies with patients. Whereas if you're just going to some riding school, today you're on Casper and tomorrow you're on Jester, and the relationship's not formed properly.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I was in a riding school growing up as well, and I definitely had relationships with the ponies, and riding was super beneficial for me. And I think it can be beneficial for any child. Riding lessons can be beneficial for any child, but doing therapy and having therapeutic goals on the horse is very different. We only walk, we don't trot, we don't canter, nothing. We just in the walk. No matter how long the child's been doing hippotherapy, we just work in the walk. We also are qualified therapeutic riding instructors. So we also do, if our children are more able-bodied children, and they do kind of move past the hippotherapy stage, but are still really benefiting from being on the horse and having that emotional connection, then we do therapeutic riding with them, where we actually are teaching them to ride the horse with the saddle, but that's not hippotherapy. That's very different.
I'm so glad you clarified that for us. The other reason for doing the show is that I think we learn a lot, and I actually learned something new from Shaz today, or about Shaz today. I didn't know she actually rode horses before, but I like what she said there, like getting thrown off the horse. I mean, I didn't even think of that, but I'm glad with your patients, they're not even riding them. They're just, you're just walking with them, so they don't have to get thrown off the horse. Did you actually get thrown off the horse, Shaz? That scares me.
Yes, I got thrown off the horse and then got my foot trod on. So like I say, and a horse isn't exactly a light creature, but look, all fairness, it was my fault. But when you're a kid, you don't actually realize that. So it can be painful, but the big thing is to get back out, go back to riding lessons next week and climb back onto the horse and carry on. Otherwise but I had a very black toe for a while, and they're not very pretty, but it's a learning experience.
I was going to ask you, what did you do to the horse so that it threw you?
Look, we were going on an outride, and more than anything, I was mucking about with my cousins. So I think more than anything, I probably just spooked the horse as I came past something. So I got bounced, and but it happens, as I have a natural thing with animals. I got attacked by a Bengal a week and a half ago. It happens.
Yeah, she's like one of the few people that I know that gets attacked by a cat. Normally the cats go the other way, they're quite skittish, but this cat comes straight for her. So tetanus, rabies, injections later.
Oh, shame. Yeah.
Do you find that
No, no.
with your experience with horses, Emma? I know I think I'm using this opportunity to learn a lot more about that aspect as well. So I know it's not quite hippotherapy, but do you find like with horses that they do that, or is it just, like as Shaz said, they just get spooked?
I think generally speaking, it's the rider's fault, like Shaz said. Um, Horses do get spooked, they do, but then if you don't stay on, you're not sitting nicely or you're not paying attention. I mean, I've fallen off countless times. Like I can't even tell you how many times I've fallen off, but I've been riding my whole life. In fact, the very first time I ever rode a horse, I fell off and broke my arm. And all I wanted to do was go back and ride again. I was 3 years old.
Wow.
Yeah, but it does happen, I think, when we're not paying attention. And horses, at the end of the day, are wild animals. They've got a mind of their own, and they weigh, like, 500 kilos. So, yeah, you are working with a wild animal at the end of the day. Well, not wild, but at the end of the day, they're still an animal. They have a mind of their own. If they want to do something, they can do it very easily. And I think that that's what makes riding and working with horses so amazing, because that horse chooses to work alongside you. And it doesn't have to, but it chooses to.
I love how you said that. Actually, that's pretty profound. And
Mm.
yeah, like I mean, I remember the first time I saw a horse, and I think we went for some gathering on the south coast, and they had horses, and I was quite surprised at how big they are. And yeah, so for this really large animal to actually put its faith in you. And I've heard also, I mean, like, yeah, they have a mind of their own. I mean, all have, like with dogs as well as any animal. I mean, they all have
Yeah.
their own personalities. We have a cat, and sometimes, she goes for therapy with my wife, because my wife does therapy sometimes at home. And other times she just decides, like today, she's like, no, she's not going for therapy. She's sitting right here. She doesn't want to go anywhere close to that room, which
Yeah.
is actually quite cool. And the fact that you can see that as well, with patients and the horses, because obviously the horses, I think I find quite fascinating, that
Mm.
that. Do you have a good sense when someone's coming in, which horse would probably, gravitate towards them, or probably be or the best fit, or do you just like start with one of them?
It depends on so many factors. So if we've got a little person, we'll put them on our little pony, just because the movement of the bigger horses will be very overwhelming for a little child. So the youngest we can start hippotherapy is 2 years old. So our kiddies can be very little. And yeah, the bigger stride is just very overwhelming for them. And sometimes their little legs don't even fit over the horse's back. So yeah, usually we'll use our smaller ponies for our little children, or for our very nervous kids, we'll start them on the smaller pony until they feel more confident, and then we'll match them with the horse that we feel best suits their sensory needs. So it comes more down to the sensory needs of the child. Are they needing more vestibular input? Are they needing more proprioceptive inputs? So we kind of match the stride of the horse or the movement of the horse to the sensory needs of the child. And then if we find emotionally that the child's not connecting to the horse, then we change things up a bit. But usually we start with the sensory processing side of it.
So I actually really love that you mentioned that, because one of the conversations that Oliver and I've had quite a few times now is with therapists around sensory integration. And it's absolutely amazing to hear how just the different movement of a horse can really benefit a child's sensory systems. Is there anything else around hippotherapy that could help children with sensory issues? I mean, I know that there's the movement and stuff and helping them cross the midlines, but a child that's got visual or auditory problems, would hippotherapy help them as well?
Absolutely. So like I said to you, the movement of the horse inherently is beneficial for the child, but then we also do activities on the horse. So for example, we'll play auditory processing games where we tell a story and then we talk about the story afterwards and what we can remember. Or we'll have visual perceptual activities that we do on the horse. So there's a lot that we can do on the horse. When the child is facing backwards, we can use the bum of the horse as like almost a tabletop where they can do activities. we do a lot of problem solving and joint attention stuff and reasoning. So for the ADHD kids, it's also lovely because the movement of the horse gives them that sensory input that they need to switch on their brains to focus. And then they engage for much longer periods of time than what they do in the classroom or even in the therapy room. So we just find like concentration is so much better. So yeah, attention and concentration, postural control, vestibular processing, proprioceptive processing, and then the tactile element of the horse itself. We can use other tactile stuff on the horse to work with the child. We often have our tactile bowls or our sensory bowls there with the child. Hand-eye coordination. So throwing things at targets, grading the force of movement. So again, your proprioception. Sometimes we'll give the child a bucket of water to carry around and we'll see how much water is left at the end. We do that on hot days. The kids love that. So that's their visual motor integration and being able to coordinate their body to balance and not spill the water. So there's lots of different activities that we do. Feely bags, so sensory discrimination, having a bag of, say, rice, for example, and having different things inside, and the kiddies have to feel and explain what it feels like and what they think it could be. So there's so much stuff. I mean, the majority of what we can do in the therapy room, we can do on the horse as well.
You know, I know we joked with with people that have been on the show before that almost like the kids. It's so unfair to parents because the kids come for therapy and they have such a blast, and then you have to bring them back home, and like because you guys have like such cool toys, and even now as you're saying that, there's so much of therapeutic benefit, but it must be amazing for a child coming through for therapy like that. I mean, for me, it makes me feel really cool that we have those type of options, available, and someone like yourself that can actually do this. And actually, it makes the world a better place. I think it's actually so cool, and I think that's that's the reason we'll be doing this. Is that I mean, I would have never, and obviously I know the term now, but probably 10 years ago, I mean, I would have never even considered something like that. And I think we opening, probably the awareness of just a layperson, just parents that actually these things do exist, and there's options, which is actually quite cool.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so thanks very much for doing that stuff because I think that's amazing, and also for being on the show to tell us a little bit about it. But coming back to the sensory integration stuff, do you find that especially having specialists like yourself on the show, do you find that kids actually grow out of it, or is it something that they always have to be conscious of?
That's a tricky question. I think that sensory processing patterns are also sensory temperaments are part of who we are, what we, how we're born. A child that's very sensitive is probably always going to be sensitive, but we can help them. We can help them to be more regulated, and we can help them to manage their sensory processing difficulties better. A child with sensory discrimination difficulties, so the functional stuff, that we can definitely work on and improve on. And the better outcomes are with early intervention. So if we see a child that's, say, over the age of 7 or 8, they probably are always going to have difficulties, although we can improve on them. But the earlier on you see the kiddies, the better. So if we can start seeing kiddies at 2, 3, 4 years old, yes, we can definitely help them to manage their little world better and interact with their worlds better and function better. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you mentioned that as well. I mean, Shaz has quite a funny story because we had an interview with someone and they said, like as a kid, I mean, you can just go into the cupboard and like just shut off all of the external stuff. But as an adult, you probably or at work, you probably can't do that without everyone not giving you a promotion or something. But so it's quite cool that you mentioned you almost like find a way that you can live with this over time. But I think you also touched on a really good point, which is the whole early intervention stuff. And I think probably 10-15 years ago, I'm not sure, Emma, if that's your experience, but it wasn't as well known. But I find most of the therapists that we work with now, the early intervention is quite a big part of it, and they always tell us the earlier we see the child, the better it is for the child, which is actually really cool. And I think some of the schools also geared to pick up these things rather than I just remember as a child I mean, in school. I mean, there were certain kids that you knew something is not quite 100%, like the one was actually a really good friend of mine, but he struggled in primary school. I mean, you could check. He was always the last one to finish, writing the stuff from the board. And, I think it went largely, undiagnosed for a long time. But when it came to video games, he was like phenomenal. He would, he was like absolutely amazing. So we, as kids, I mean, this was just us. So we would like, why? So why can't you do your schoolwork? You would like beat us like 6-love in the video games, but like when it came to schoolwork, you weren't that good. But yeah, just that stuff. So can you tell us, just to wrap up, is there anything that we should have asked you that we didn't around hippotherapy, that we didn't cover?
I don't think so. I'm very happy for you to share the link to our video. So if anyone does have any questions, they're more than welcome to watch that. That's really informative, and it gives lovely personal accounts from parents as well. Yeah, but I think you've pretty much covered everything. In terms of early intervention, just touching back on that, that's my passion hugely. I'm a huge advocate of early intervention. We start seeing kiddies in the NICU. Obviously, we don't put them on the horse quite then, but we definitely see the kids that we pick up early, the prognosis is so much better because of that neuroplasticity. So the brain is most plastic up until 3 years old. And so if we can intervene before 3, that's optimum. And before 5 is also great, because the brain develops the most up until the age of 5. So yeah, early intervention really, really is key. And it's something I really do advocate. So it's something that I'm on a mission about with schools and trying to get teachers on board. And sometimes it's tricky because a lot of parents and teachers also say, well, we didn't have these difficulties in our day. Like, we didn't have this access to help, and kids must just get on with it. But the reality is that the world is very different now to what we were raised in, and the pressures of the school system are hugely different. And so our children are expected to do so much more, so much earlier on. And if they do have difficulties, they're going to be swimming upstream in such a demanding world where we didn't have such huge demands on us as kids. So these kids have got a hard enough time as it is. And then if they have difficulties and have to swim upstream with those difficulties, we really are doing them a disservice if we can help them.
So, I mean, you're saying some really, really cool things. And I don't want to say the story again because, I've said it, once or twice on the show. But for our little boy, if we weren't in the same room as Meg Foray in Cape Town at the point that, we were, we were sitting in a workshop Meg was doing in Cape Town, and she was showing us these videos, and then we knew our little boy had sensory integration stuff. But the reason I'm saying this is, Emma, on your side, I mean, if a parent is listening to this, how would they know that they need early intervention? I mean, I think that's the key thing. For us, it was like, the moment just happened. And we were fortunate that the moment happened. But, you go through the normal stuff around pediatricians and stuff like that. But how would because what you're saying is very profound and very important. You want to catch it as early as you can, although it's, it kind of makes sense, early intervention. But you're saying before 3 and then before 5. But as a parent, how would they know that?
It's a very good question, and it's tricky because very often we don't see the functional fallout in our children until much later on. So sometimes we'll get kids referred to us in grade 2 and they're suddenly struggling, but no one's picked anything up before that. And it's because the demands then of grade 2 are challenging their difficulties, where before they weren't challenged enough in that way. And so we didn't see the difficulties. But if we were to screen those children earlier on, we would have picked up that there were difficulties with neural pathways or fallout there. And so I advocate to parents to get their children screened between the ages of 1 and 2 years old. So we have specialists coming into our schools that do visual screening, they do auditory screening, and why aren't we doing developmental screening? So a lot of schools now will get OTs to come into the classroom and screen the children. So we look at reflex integration, which is very fundamental in neural development. So if our children's primitive reflexes in the first year of life are not integrated, that can cause huge issues down the line. Usually when we assess a child in, say, for example, at grade 2 level, we'll see a pattern. So there's a reflex that's not integrated. The child didn't crawl for long enough, or the child's always been clumsy, or there's always some kind of pattern that's happened in the past. And so, yeah, I think really getting into schools and doing the developmental screenings and seeing, just making sure that the child is moving in typical movement patterns and that the reflexes are integrated. And there we would pick up any fallout. And so that's something I'm very, very, I have a very strong opinion about, because we screen for eyes and we screen for ears. So why aren't we screening for brain development?
I think you answered that perfectly, and then that's probably, I mean, you know, this has a long-reaching, and I'm sure it's not a solution that you fix straight away, but I can kind of see education in this. I can kind of see, yeah, because as you said, why isn't the education system? Because they're probably in the best position to do that. But even what you said, I mean, it's probably still too late, around this. Maybe it has to start with pediatricians. Pediatricians should advocate as part of one of their checks is you have to go see an OT. We haven't had a pediatrician on as yet, but for us, the pediatrician didn't pick it up straight away, and you kind of always looking at exactly what you're saying, milestones. Okay, the milestone seems to be a little bit late, delayed on this. Let's see how it goes. But I think OTs, I mean, and I probably, because I joked about this because I didn't know what an OT does 10 years ago, to be completely honest. But when we started working with, the different types of practitioners, the one that's almost like unsung heroes in my mind is, the OTs, because people don't really understand, what they do. And I think it's actually quite critical that you almost like they're on that checklist, that they, the child does have to go for the screen, from an OT, just to give it the, the go ahead and say, actually something is, everything is fine.
Yeah, I think it also just gives parents peace of mind. And more often than not, if we are screening a child between 1 and 2 years of age and there is a difficulty, we can more often than not give the parents a home program. And so the child doesn't require therapy. Whereas if it's left, the child would require more intensive therapy down the line. So we do have some peds that we work very closely with that do refer kids for developmental screenings between 1 and 2, or recommend it. And that is so amazing. I mean, I think it's so empowering for moms just to know that everything's okay, or if there's a few little things that they can do at home, it just helps them to understand their children better.
Yeah, I love that. And I think also, I mean, like you're touching on some really good points, but like also the home program, because I think that's the other thing we found as a common thread across all of the practitioners is that, you only with the child for half an hour, maybe an hour, maybe an hour and a half in the week, but there's so much more that could be done in a home setting that if parents just knew how to do that. She has asked the one therapist, but you guys have such cool toys and you have these tunnels. And I remember the practitioner just said, but you could, string 2 or 3 chairs together and just cover it with a blanket, and now you have a tunnel. Stuff like that is so like amazing, for a parent to think about, because you go into these therapy rooms and it looks intimidating because OTs have probably the best toys for kids, with the swings and the tunnels and the ball pits, and, you can't really compare with that as a parent. But yeah, there's other ways that you could probably do this. But I think we did this topic, I really enjoyed the conversation. I think to wrap it up, Shaz, anything on your side that we should have asked Emma?
No, I think we covered all the bases and actually got a couple of other interesting points out. And the one that's definitely coming across over several conversations is that idea of that early intervention. The sooner you pick the stuff up, the better. The one thing Emma did say, which kind of rings true with me, is that whole concept of when you speak to parents or teachers and they say, yeah, but we didn't have this back then, when we were younger, and get over it. I think what a lot of parents need to realize is that you probably did have it when you were a kid, or, you knew somebody who had it, but because it wasn't out in the open, they were kind of the kid in the, the special class or the remedial class, and the biggest problem with not catching it or not treating it is you then have an adult that now has issues, and that's got its own knock-on effect. So the sooner you pick issues up, the better. The last thing you want is your child's now in university with full-blown ADHD and they actually cannot cope because you didn't pick it up at school. And that for me is really important. That
Absolutely. And I think, sorry, yeah, I think, the self-esteem thing is so huge. And like you said, that has a knock-on effect throughout the child's life, right through adulthood. So the child struggles with self-esteem because they can see that they're not as good as Johnny sitting next to them. That is heartbreaking. And the most heartbreaking thing for me is when the child has got the intellectual ability. So they've got it in their heads, but they just can't put it down on paper, or they can't verbalize it. So those kids, I mean, they're so bright. They've got the potential to do so well in life, but now school is hard and they learn to dislike learning because learning is hard. And that for them, again, like you say, is going to have such a knock-on effect down the line. So if we can make learning easier for our kids that are so super intelligent and give them the opportunity to do well at school, then I think, why not?
Yeah. And
Exactly.
and also, yeah, so quite a fortunate position that you're working with these kids, and you can see that I think kids, by their nature, they do want to do the best they can. I mean, there's something about that, wanting to please, and am I doing a good job here? And I think what you as as therapists do is you open up those possibilities, which is really cool. And I think you have the other added benefit of what we've been talking about today, which is the hippotherapy stuff. Now you're marrying the horses with the children that want to do the best they can, and the horses that want to do the best they can. And I think that's actually pretty amazing for what you're doing for the space, which is very cool. You did mention the video. We are definitely going to link to that. We'll also link to your contact details. And I think for anyone listening to this, and if this makes any sense, I mean, they, with your contact details, hopefully they give you a call and just go through that. But what we wanted to get out of this is that, if I'm a parent listening to this and I just want to know, what is hippotherapy? Why would it be beneficial for my child? Because it seems kind of weird at the moment, with all of the Google articles I'm reading. I think now we put a face to it, we've put a voice to it, and with the resources, would hopefully be an amazing resource for any parent where they think the child probably needs this. So thank you very much. Sorry.
Thank you so much for having me and for giving me the opportunity to get hippotherapy out there. I appreciate it very much.
Cool. Yeah, no, it's been our pleasure, actually. I mean, we just kind of we just trying to do our part in terms of just bring it out. And, like I said, with our little boy, if Meg at that point, she didn't have a course, but I think she does have it now. If Meg had a course and we could understand more at that point, we would have bought it straight away, even if that course was 2,000 rands. We did buy a book, but that's kind of the experience that we're trying to replicate, is that if someone's listening to this and they just want more information, and they want to put a face to, and a voice to Emma, that's what, and if we could have achieved that, that would be amazing, which I think will be cool. So yeah, thanks very much for having us, thanks very much for being on board.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks very much, Emma.
Cool.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening. As always, stay tuned and we'll speak to you in the next episode.